LegalizeFreedom.com. Why are we here? Where do we come from? Where are we going? From the nature of reality to the future of humanity. Beyond politics, poverty and war. LegalizeFreedom.com.
Greetings and welcome once again to LegalizeFreedom.com. I'm your host Greg Moffat, and my guest today is Courtney Brown, who joins us to discuss the Farsight Institute's latest project, the Phoenix Lights. On Thursday, March 13th, 1997, an anomalous series of lights flew in steady formation over the American Southwest, eventually settling over Phoenix, Arizona. The lights appeared to be connected to a large craft, and the underbelly of that craft was so big it blocked out much of the sky above. The event was witnessed by thousands of people for a number of hours, including the then Governor of Arizona. Utilising new data from two of the best remote viewers on the planet, and methodologies derived from those developed and used by the US military for espionage, it appears that this event involved at least one huge extraterrestrial spacecraft. The results for this project also include impressive corroborating data and what appears to be a direct communication between a being on the craft and one of the remote viewers, a communication beyond conventional space-time and spanning the years 1997 to 2015. Later in the interview, we turn to a number of related topics, including consciousness, psychic phenomena and the subtle realms of existence beyond five-sense perception, the vital importance of earthbound human experience, and the fundamental nature of reality. Hello and welcome, Courtney, and thank you so much for joining us once again on LegalizeFreedom.com.
Well, Greg, it's really a pleasure to be back, and I appreciate being invited back.
Yeah, it's getting to be something of a habit, isn't it? Now, today we're going to talk about the new Farsight project, the Phoenix Lights, but as always, there'll be people who are coming into this show who haven't heard any of your previous interviews or even any of your interviews in other media. So just give us your background and the remote viewing 101, because that's essentially the subject we're going to be talking about today. Sure.
Well, I'm Courtney Brown. I'm director of the Farsight Institute. That's like seeing far, FARSIGHT.org, O-R-G, because we're a nonprofit. And we're the largest venue on the planet, the biggest, best venue on the planet, because we're the only venue on the planet where you have full-blown public studies of remote viewing under scientific conditions. And remote viewing is a mental process that was developed by the United States military and used for espionage purposes. And their official programs were closed down in November of 1995, but people who I know and trust, and myself included, are quite convinced that the remote viewing project was started right up again under a different name, and it is much bigger now than it was before. But, you know, the military has a long history with remote viewing, and we are not military, we're civilian, and we work with some of the best remote viewers on the planet in doing public projects where people can actually watch what we do and so on. And we've had a public projects going back to over 10 years, and so we have a whole collection of them on our website. But the latest one is on the Phoenix Lights, which is the series of lights that flew in formation over Phoenix, Arizona, and over 5 states in the Southwest, including Sonora, Mexico, and 4 American states, that were seen by potentially hundreds of thousands of people and definitively tens of thousands of people, including the governor of the state of Arizona. And the U.S. military, 6 months after the event, issued a statement through a flight lieutenant saying, "Oh, those are just flares that we dropped during training exercises." But that didn't match with what people saw, And the governor of the state, who is a former Air Force officer and a pilot, he went on record as saying, this is bigger than anything I've ever seen. He called it it looked like an extraterrestrial spacecraft. People that saw it, and we were talking tens of thousands of people, said it was so big it blocked out the sky above, and it had lights on the sides of it and the whole thing. And so, the eyewitness reports did not match the government statements, so that was a mystery. That was a classic thing for using remote viewing. So remote viewing is a mental process where the remote viewers are told absolutely nothing about a target, and that is the thing that they're supposed to perceive. And they go into a room and come out later with, in the old days, it was 10 to 20 pages of paper that describes the target in detail. But these days we do our sessions recorded live on video. And all the sessions are done solo. So there's no one in the room to lead the viewer. The viewers are given nothing except an email from me that is non-leading that says there is a target, remote view it, send it in, period. And they do their work and they send it in, all recorded live on video. And then what we do is we publish these projects so people can see the remote viewing done live, and it is spellbinding to watch because it's clear that the audience knows what the target is because you're watching the video. But the remote viewer, at the time that the sessions are being recorded, obviously does not know what the target is. And the level of clarity that they bring to the descriptions is absolutely amazing. So the two remote viewers that were working on this particular project, the Phoenix Lights, were Daz Smith, who's from the UK, and he works with the CRV methodology, and that was a methodology that came out of an official military program, the U.S. Army Intelligence, the DIA, Defense Intelligence Agency, and has long been taught by people like Lynn Buchanan and so on. And Dick Algar, who works out in Hawaii using a procedure known as the HRVG methodology, and that was taught to him by Glenn Wheaton, who came out of Special Forces Intelligence. And Special Forces Intelligence had an unofficial movement within the military. Again, it was Army. It was not an official program. And this unofficial movement later became known as the 1st Earth Battalion, and that was featured in the movie Men Who Stare at Goats, starring George Clooney and Jeff Bridges. So, two different methodologies, two different approaches, opposite ends of the planet, no communication between them, and no prior knowledge of what the target is. They both did their sessions and sent them in, and they gave unbelievably, stunningly accurate descriptions of the area, the desert city in the American Southwest, and the lights. And no, the official governmental story that it was some flares does not win. It appears to have been an actual spacecraft. And there was an unusual thing that happened in one of the recordings that we can talk about later. There seems to have been a direct communication between someone on the spacecraft and one of our remote viewers, Dick Algar. Sort of like a conversation in a sense, but a communication is a better way to put it. And that's interesting because the Phoenix Lights incident happened back in 1997, and we're talking about the remote viewing happening in 2015. So that's very interesting because that means that there was people at the site, that there were extraterrestrials on a spacecraft at the site in 1997 that knew full well that they were communicating with humans investigating the event in 2015.
That's one of the things about remote viewing, isn't it? It's the beyond time and space.
It goes. It takes information right across time and space in apparent complete violation of the mainstream laws of physics. Now, I'm a mathematician. I work in a social science program at a major university, but I do not do any remote viewing research at the university. All of that is done at the Farsight Institute. However, as a mathematician, I'm deeply invested in the mathematics of quantum mechanics, physics, and relativistic physics and quantum mechanics physics. There's nothing wrong with their mathematics, period, full stop. It's the interpretation, especially the interpretation of quantum mechanics extended out or generalized to the macro world that is open to debate. And that's where the great problem occurs with regard to mainstream acceptance of the reality of remote viewing. There was a theory that was developed in 1997, presented in 1997 by a physicist named Hugh Everett, who worked under John Wheeler to get his PhD, and that was at Princeton University. And he developed a theory that many call the other worlds interpretation of a particular quantum mechanical experiment called the two-slit experiment. And he was widely laughed at the time because he talked about basically there being parallel realities and there, being these realities can interact among themselves and so on. Anyway, but the basic idea is it threw a monkey wrench into the sort of the canon of relativistic and quantum mechanics at the time. And Hugh Everett, who was the designer of this new idea, was widely laughed at and mocked. He left physics as a result of that. He was disgusted and went into the U.S. Defense Department. However, now about 18% of mainstream physicists have accepted his ideas as correct, and the 82% are older and dying. Eventually, they will be replaced generationally. So we do see a change in the physics community to an understanding of physics that allows for the remote viewing phenomenon to occur. So mainstream understandings of physics, relativistic and quantum mechanics, are over 100 years old. There's been lots of improvements and lots of finesses in the details, but the fundamentals haven't changed for over 100 years. So nothing stays constant for that long a time in science. So they're wrong almost on that level alone. And they're all based on interpretation of experience. So, that's going to have to change. And so remote viewing does work, but it does work in complete violation of the mainstream accepted laws of physics. But we do have a good grasp now of the laws of physics that will have to replace those laws that will allow for this type of information transfer across time and space. But anyway, that was part of the Phoenix Lights surprise that we came into. It wasn't just the remote viewing of the lights themselves, but remote viewing of the lights in combination with the apparent communication.
There were sort of two events here in a way, wasn't there? There was this sort of wedge-shaped formation of lights that a lot of people spoke about as being like a craft, and then there was a sort of more nebulous cluster of lights.
There were a lot of lights, and they hung around for a long time, and they were in formation. And like the governor of Arizona said, flares don't fly in formation. They also don't stay up there for like 2 hours, and they certainly don't cross state boundaries, 5 state boundaries. So,
yeah, it's a big area we're talking about here, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a very big area, and you're talking about an awful lot of people who witnessed this event. And the mainstream media basically was silent on the whole thing until the government sent out their flight lieutenant to explain them away with a statement, they were just flares. And mainstream media was more than dutiful in promoting that idea. Oh, by the way, there was an event that happened back, and now we know what it was. It was just flares. So it's sort of funny to see how the mainstream media kicks into gear on cue.
Yeah, I used to live in Rendlesham Forest in Suffolk, and that's the location in the UK of one of probably the most famous alleged UFO sighting, and I seem to remember the media being pretty silent on that as well.
Yeah, they stay silent until the government comes out with a ridiculous explanation for it, and then they jump at the queue and promote that. It's very interesting.
Now, as you said, the official response when it eventually emerged, not the media now, we're talking about government, or more specifically the military, was to talk about there being flares.
Yeah.
I've noticed that disregarding actually the veracity of any UFO sightings or so-called alien craft over the years, it always seems to involve the military. I mean, the military have been intimately involved in this area since day one, haven't they, really, since the 1950s?
Yeah. There's nothing that they do that isn't, that they're not, there's nothing dealing with there's nothing dealing with UFOs that the military is not connected with. That's a very big deal for them.
Now, the talk of flares, as you say, was given as the official explanation, but there's some major problems with that. You mentioned the moving in formation for a start, but the eyewitness reports, what's unusual about this incident is it was seen by so many people. It's
so many people. I mean, that's why we picked it as a target, because it was seen by so many people. I mean, we're talking about documented tens of thousands of people in Phoenix alone. But if you consider not just Phoenix, but the, the 4 American states plus Mexico, that's a huge level of stuff. I mean, that's an awful lot of people. Enormous quantity of people who have been, are seeing it. And normally with Farsight projects, we deal with pictures. We deal with governmental photos, and those governmental photos are released, and they really are not in dispute, and there's an anomaly there. So for us to deal with sort of a UFO sighting that doesn't have pictures, that's a bit unusual for us. And the reason that is unusual is because there was no picture to go with. So normally we would not have done that, except that there were so many witnesses, including even documentary. CNN did a documentary with Fife Symington, the governor of Arizona, the then governor of Arizona, detailing what he was saying about it and what he saw in it. And I mean, so the level of eyewitness support, the level of eyewitness verification of the event was so huge, we decided that we didn't need to have I decided that we didn't need to have a photograph to go on. Besides, there was another problem with photograph. If we used individuals, back in 1997, people didn't really have cell phone type cameras like they have today. So back in those days, they had film cameras, like 35 millimeter film. And that was a problem because not everybody had a camera on them. In addition, people who were right underneath the craft shooting up, their cameras malfunctioned. They often got just like a lot of white, so they didn't get good pictures of it. The only people who did get pictures were people who were far away, and they were not far away, but far enough away that the cameras weren't influenced by whatever was coming out of the craft. So what you have is the tens of thousands of people who are seeing this with their eyeballs, and including some very reputable people, police officers, firefighters, governor of the state, so on like that. But then you do have some photographs. Now, since we didn't have an official government photo, from our perspective, it's actually a little bit risky to put any person's particular photograph of the Phoenix Lights events there, because no matter how good it is, no matter how wonderful it is, you always run the risk of someone later coming and saying, that was a doctored photo, so on. They can't do that with official governmental photos, but they can do that from things that are just from private individuals. So, anyway, so that's the concern that we have, we don't have a physical photo, but on the other hand, we do have something that's even more important, which is the number of eyewitness reports.
What did you make of the footage and images such as they are?
Well, they're very interesting. The only trouble from our perspective is they're not official governmental photos. Mm. So I have no problems with the images. There's a lot of them you can see some of them on YouTube and so on. It's just that, for us to sort of bet the bank on any particular photograph, for example, there's a video of the Phoenix Lights that shows like these orbiting, like the lights turned into like globes and so on like that. And it doesn't take anything for somebody to come up with a challenge for that. They can just say, oh no, that's just And then you're off down the rabbit hole because we don't do photographic analysis. So we're not the type of people that actually can go in and say, this is a correct photo. We're not doing that. We don't do that. So what we really have to do is have some method to say there is something that's unambiguous that needs to be explained. So in this case, even though some of the photographs are undoubtedly correct and real and the whole thing, we don't have the ability to sort of be the verification institute for those photographs. So it's better for us, since they're not official government photographs, to just let them be and to let people who want to see them on YouTube and other places. And then for us to focus on the event as an event that was described and witnessed by so many thousands of people, and just leave it there. Now, this is very different from our other projects that dealt with extraterrestrials. Normally, we don't do extraterrestrial targets and extraterrestrial projects, but this year, we packaged 3 into one project, and so we call this Remote Viewing the Aliens. And the first ones we've already talked about on your show. One was Remote Viewing the Face on Mars and Cydonia Mars, both now and in the ancient past. The other one was an alien facility, a set of structures on the wall of a crater in Iapetus. It's a moon of Saturn. And then this is the third one, the Phoenix Light. So we have 3 built into one project. And that was good because our remote viewers typically do not like to do extraterrestrial targets because they don't like the extra woo-woo factor associated with the extraterrestrial content. And because they are really focused on getting remote viewing accepted as sort of a mainstream type of a thing. But in this particular case, I was able to throw 3 projects into one so that we got our money's worth out of that particular go. And we probably won't be doing alien or extraterrestrial type stuff for quite a while again, but nonetheless, it was a very interesting set of projects for us to do. And so we did it, and the results, are going to be, in my opinion, historical things. I mean, they're going to be out there forever, and the record will be clear eventually that these were path-breaking studies at some point in time. And we'll just have to wait until that happens. In the meantime, we're continue to put out our stuff, including instructional stuff. We're going to be changing gears a little bit at the Farsight Institute also. In the past, over the last few years, we've been doing projects. This goes all the way back to before 2008. And we've been doing projects one after the other. And we're switching gears now. We're going to be focusing on instructional stuff for a while. So to get a larger body of remote viewers out there that are capable of doing this on video. And so Dick Algier, for example, will be focusing on developing a video set, an instructional video set of the remote viewing methodology that's done at the Hawaii Remote Viewers Guild, the HRVG methodology that he uses. And that's very important because if he doesn't do it, the methodology will go away forever. And I'm also involved here at Farsight with training of especially young people in remote viewing, people over 18 years or older but young. And we're calling that part of what we call a new master series. So we're putting up videos relating to that on YouTube, and there's a sort of a steady stream of instructional material that will be coming out, building up again sort of the base of people who understand remote viewing and are capable of doing it. So that's sort of a shift for us, but that's what we're going to be doing for quite a while. In addition, we're going to be coming up with entertainment-oriented ideas related to remote viewing to attract a younger and wider audience to the remote viewing field itself.
In terms of what was actually observed on that day back in 1997, both Daz and Dick, when they get into their sessions, I mean, obviously there's certain things that correlate with each project that they do, but this time there was a very tight correlation, wasn't there? It was just very similar things they discerned very quickly.
Well, this is standard for Dick and Daz. They're such high quality viewers that they really do have stuff that's amazingly the same. I mean, it's just uncanny. It's almost like a photocopy of the stuff sometimes. I mean, you have two people on completely opposite ends of the planet, and with absolutely no communication between them whatsoever. And suddenly they're coming in with sessions that are virtually identical, both describing the exact same thing. And with, it's just on that level alone, the whole remote viewing process is more than astounding. It's cool. But it's true. I mean, they come up with virtually carbon copies of the same thing, describing the same being on a spacecraft over the Southwest desert city of Southwest United States. I mean, they get the environment exactly right. I mean, it's just scary sometimes, to be quite honest.
Well, two things that they sensed. One was powerful energy, and this is rather common when people speak about UFO or alien encounters that they have had. They often talk about, a change in the air, a strange energy, very powerful energy. We can speculate about what that might be. So they both sensed that, and they also sensed life. And this is obviously crucial because this is what we're talking about. Yeah.
The basic idea is that both viewers had essentially very similar data, but if there was to be a difference between them, it was that Dick Allgaier spent some time actually reaching out to and connecting with this very tall alien being, whereas Des Smith described the very tall alien being, and they both described as sort of helpers around the person, whereas Des Smith really focused on a description of the craft, a really nice drawing of the shape of the craft. It really matched the eyewitness accounts. He clearly identified it as a city in the American Southwest, a desert city in the American Southwest. And they both described it as an encounter that was sort of like an alien encounter, sort of like a first contact type of alien encounter, where you have very advanced extraterrestrials coming down, interacting with, communicating with people on the ground that were looking up and observing this light show and so on. So they both had all of that stuff. They both described Phoenix very well, the desert environment very well. Now, I remind you, they had just come off of a whole bunch of other projects, including a project dealing with the 9/11 events, both the Twin Tower collapses as well as the attack on the Pentagon, another project dealing with the Great Pyramid of Giza, another project dealing with the experiments of time and space. They've just come out of an awful lot of projects dealing with all sorts of things all over the board. And so for them to actually both hone in on the exact same thing each and every time, that's really amazing. But anyway, they both got the desert city. You see, all remote viewing data are broken into two basic categories. There's what we call verifiable data, and then what we call new data. Now, the verifiable data are those which we know to be factual on the ground. And that is, we had a desert city, we had American Southwest, we had lots of people looking up and seeing lights in the sky. Those are elements that are absolutely verifiable, and we want the remote viewing data to reflect those. And it did it perfectly for both viewers. Now we have new data, which are, once you see the lights in the sky, the viewers went to the lights and says, what are those? And then they described what those lights are. So you always evaluate remote viewing data based on how good the verifiable components are before you actually think about the new data. If the viewers just went in and said, I'm seeing an extraterrestrial spacecraft, and that's all they described, you can take the whole session and throw it out. It has to have all that verifiable stuff so you can say that this is clearly, on target description. For example, when we did the aliens on Iapetus project, both viewers clearly perceived that it was an off-world place, no atmosphere, it was a crater, there were lots of craters all over the place, it was a barren, icy moon, no vegetation, the whole works, and that there was some type of set of structures against the wall of this crater. I mean, that's all verifiable stuff in terms of the moon, the barren terrain, and so on. And the set of structures were visible in the picture, the NASA supplied picture. So, all the stuff dealing with the icy moon, the craters, airless moon, a wall of a crater, something on the side of the crater, all that's verifiable because we see it in the picture. So with regard to the Phoenix Lights, we have all of that verifiable stuff. That stuff absolutely has to be there. And so one of the great things about watching the video live recorded live, is that you see them bring in all of this verifiable stuff. And it's clearly much different than the thing they did in the last thing, which was Iapetus. So each time the targets change, their descriptions wholly fundamentally follow the target. So they're not just coming up with vague, foggy, fuzzy stuff that you're sort of associating with the target. It's really clear descriptions. So anyway, both of the remote viewers got the verifiable stuff spot on, and they both had the same new stuff. That's what was so interesting. So this apparently, Greg, really was an extraterrestrial spacecraft. But the really interesting thing from my perspective is that the people on the spacecraft knew that they were communicating with people in 2015, even though they themselves were in 1997. That's, to me, really, really interesting.
So what do you think the significance of that is?
Well, clearly they knew they were doing something on the ground that wasn't going to be explained to people for many years. So extraterrestrials understand physics much better than mainstream humans do. So they don't see a big difference with regard to time. So the fact that somebody is interacting with them in 2015, to them, that's not a big deal. So it is a big deal, however, that the interactions actually occur. So they could have ignored us. They could have just said, to heck with this, they're just a bother. But they didn't. The message, the information, the connection, the communication, people took time out of their daily lives to sort of make sure that worked and that important information was sort of sent through. So that's unusual. It's really sort of spooky, to be quite honest, but it's unusual, and it gives an idea of if what we were doing at Farsight was not important, then the extraterrestrials on that craft would not have spent the time to deal with us. So that was a good indication that what we are doing matters.
I keep reading articles, they pop up every now and again, talking about people trying to develop a warp drive, and I've read some of the mechanics to do with potential space travel, specifically what the problems are. I mean, interplanetary is enough of a problem, never mind interstellar. And I think in some ways, and of course these articles turn out to be fairly spurious in the sense that there's a nice drawing of a potential warp drive and that's all there is, I think the key to this, and this applies when we're talking about UFOs, and let's remind ourselves a UFO was simply an unidentified flying object. It's not necessarily alien. But when we're talking about this, I think that this key is touched upon with remote viewing in the sense that it's beyond time and space. And I think if we're looking at any sort of extraterrestrial phenomena, we're looking at a way of doing things, a way of being in one place or another at one time and another that we just haven't thought of yet. I think the idea of building a huge, gas-fueled rocket to sort of, launch and go from one place to another, I think we're barking up the wrong tree there.
Well, I think you're totally correct. I also think that it's clear, at least to me, that the United States military does not rely on chemical rockets for all of their space program. The idea of reverse engineered craft, reverse engineered technology gotten from crashed ET ships is a very reasonable hypothesis to go on, and it probably is what actually happens. We probably do have our own craft that use that technology, and we don't make it public. And the reason, there's a sort of a logic to it that some of your listeners may think is interesting, and that is the United States has completely abandoned its manned spaceflight program. That's after spending hundreds of billions of dollars and many, many, many years, decades, in developing this. Now, the largest military budget on the entire planet Earth is the United States military budget, of course. It is larger than the combined amount spent by every country on the world, all added up. The U.S. military budget is far bigger than that. And the largest item, single item in the entire military budget, U.S. military budget, is black, meaning there's a huge chunk of it that simply no one knows what it's spent on. So you have this huge amount of money, and the United States is not shy at all about spending money on anything that could have military applications. And so you can obviously see that manned spaceflight is something that would have an interest in the military. So they're never going to abandon such a thing. The very fact that they have abandoned it tells you that they have another way to do it. And closing down the U.S. manned spaceflight program is another way of saying that they are so confident that they can manage the public response that the public will accept essentially anything that they say, such as, we're not going to do that anymore, and not ask the questions. They're so confident that that will happen, that they can manage it, that they don't really have to come up with an excuse for why this glaringly illogical occurrence seems to have occurred, which is to walk away from something that they invested hundreds of billions of dollars and many decades of work in, and just to wipe their hands and say, well, that was fun, guys. We'll go off and do other things now. I mean, that's just not credible. So what is credible to me is that the technology that is needed to build and fly spacecraft of the type that the extraterrestrials use is available to humans. Maybe not in all of the details and all of the fancy stuff, but at least enough of the basic technology exists so that if they need to get someplace in the solar system, they can do it, and they don't have to rely on chemical rockets. Now, I can't say that as a matter of proof. I can't say, here's the ship, and Greg, let's go out and take a look at it. I can't bring a military general here to confess and tell you the whole story. But I think any reasonable person would say it's the only logical conclusion that you can come to.
Well, there's a grey area here, isn't there, if you'll pardon the pun, in terms of black technology, in the sense that a lot of people have speculated rather, that some of these UFO sightings are in fact just something the military has that we haven't seen yet. But the whole
that actually could be.
But the point being, we can't verify it either way.
Yeah, but the Phoenix Lights project clearly was not one of those things, because that is one we actually went after, sent the best remote bureaus on the planet to look at it, and they got all the verifiable stuff correct. And when they went into the craft, they did find U.S. military people running a test aircraft using hybrid technology. They found extraterrestrials from another place. So that's a very interesting sort of conclusion to draw. Besides, if there are technologies that the United States military is using from extraterrestrial origin, that still tells you that there are extraterrestrials that have technology that have been visiting us. Otherwise, where would the technology would come from? So either way, you're still dealing with extraterrestrials.
The space program in the US almost seems to be going into reverse in some ways.
Publicly.
Yeah, of course. A lot of it, as you say, the old-fashioned bits of it, if we can call it that, being abandoned, and there's an increasing use of private contractors now, or using Russian rockets. And recently, of course, we saw the resupply vessel that was destined for the space lab. That exploded. It's not the first accident of its kind, and so it's it can be very, very confusing if you don't consider what actually might lie behind it. It can be very confusing as to why this is happening.
Actually, those mishaps and those continued efforts are exactly what the military wants. They want the public to see that the spacecraft stuff is very dangerous and highly volatile and things fall apart, and that's why they're not doing it. And so it sort of fits into the entire script. So, when things sort of don't happen well, that's not necessarily a bad thing. But they really want is the public to not ask questions, especially with regard to all of the obvious illogical aspects of walking away from the manned spaceflight program. I mean, here we have an international space station. We have Americans on the International Space Station. We have people that have gone to the moon. We have a need to go elsewhere, and they just are walking away from the entire thing, not even polishing off the old technology. I mean, it's just crazy. I mean, it's just to think that it's... Anyway, so we don't really have to worry too much about it. The listeners are either going to agree and say, yeah, that's crazy and they must be doing something, or they're going to say, we have no proof. And you really can't convince people one way or the other. Words don't persuade. So if people are not sort of buying into the logic of it, then it just doesn't make any sense to try to persuade them. But it does make sense to me. And the Phoenix Lights thing, by the way, I have to mention that the Phoenix Lights thing, many people, it's been available for a couple of weeks now on Vimeo as a video on demand, and it's just now today become available on Amazon as a DVD. So there's a lot of people who still like the DVD technology. They like to have the physical disc, and so that's actually a nice thing to be able to announce on your program that it does actually exist.
Tell folks a bit more about this direct communication then, because it's, as you say, it's probably the single most striking thing to come out of the entire session.
Yeah, well, we in the documentary, we go through all of the remote viewing for both viewers, and we start with Dad Smith, and he describes the being, describes the helpers, describes the people on the ground, describes the spacecraft above, describes the location, and exactly spot on identifies where that location is in terms of the American Southwest Desert City. And then we move to Dick Algire's session, and he essentially repeats much of the same thing, amazingly, describing the light in the sky that everybody's looking at, formation of lights in the sky, and the spacecraft. And he then describes what appears to be the exact same being in the spacecraft, and then he gets really close to the being. And this is very interesting, Greg, because when you remote view humans, they can never tell you're remote viewing them. They just can't. Now, if you come across somebody who says, oh no, I can tell and I can know that somebody's been remote viewing me and so on like that, in my humble opinion, they're just in need of medical care. I mean, they're crazy. It's just not true. First of all, no one would ever do remote viewing to spy on a neighbor or any person like that, because the amount of effort that's required to do it is so huge. People have to get involved with setting up targets. All types of conditions have to be done. I mean, you only do remote viewing for major projects. And so the idea of using it to look at a person is crazy. And secondly, when we do remote view humans, like at a military base or in some building on the other end of the planet or whatever, we have no instances of the humans actually being able to detect that it's happening. However, with extraterrestrials that are advanced extraterrestrials, that's not the case. They actually know you're remote viewing. In fact, they often see you coming and seem to expect you coming. And they see you, and they often turn right in your direction, look at you. It's like you leave some type of a ghostly vestige of yourself, some type of a presence you leave when you go there. And they actually look right at you. Now, this was described very early in the remote viewing literature by Ingo Swann in his book Penetration, which I understand is now available as a free ebook. And he described it where he was taken by the U.S. military and asked to remote view some locations on the moon. And he did. And Ingo Swann was the inventor of the CRV methodology. And during the remote viewing on the moon, he said that some of the extraterrestrials on the moon actually were turning around and pointing at him and looking at him and saying, look at over there. And then the military got freaked out. And they did something really sort of, in current standards, was sort of silly. They said, pull back. We don't want to be seen. Get back. So they ended the session with Ingo as if he had to sort of get out of there. We wouldn't do that now. What we would do now is simply continue the session, and they'd go up to the extraterrestrials and keep on looking at them and finding out everything there. But it's been reported numerous times that some extraterrestrial species can see you coming. And in the Phoenix Lights, it was one of those. It was those situations where they saw the person actually coming. So when Dick Algar went up close to this large extraterrestrial and started to describe him, look in his eyes, the extraterrestrial just, saw him and the whole thing, looking in his eyes and everything, and off went the conversation. So it's just like if someone came up to you and started staring at your eyes, you'd probably say, well, what's up? Well, that's sort of what happened.
It's interesting here, some parallels that are popping into my mind. I've read about psychedelic experiences that people have had, with DMT or LSD. And in these, let's just say they're in another realm, that's the best way to put it, when they're in this state. And they have, multiple times, I've read accounts of people encountering beings while in that state who expected them. That's the description they give. They said it's like they were waiting for me to come.
It's like they're waiting for you to come.
So there may be no connection here, but I think what we're talking about when we're seeing overlaps here, what we're really getting at is that remote viewing is entering a sort of a subtle realm that in our everyday waking five sense condition we're just not aware of.
Yeah, that's exactly it. Apparently our genetic structure as humans is designed to make telepathy and remote perception very difficult to get to.
Yes.
That's why we're having this conversation right now, and why we're talking about remote viewing as an interesting phenomenon. It's not so natural. And with some other extraterrestrial groups, the genetics are such that it is natural. So for them, there is no such thing as trying to prove that remote viewing is real, because it's part of their existence. It's like us trying to prove that seeing out of your eyes is real. No one's ever tried to prove that, because everyone can open their eyes and see. They know that you can see if you open your eyes. Well, if an extraterrestrial has a genetic, easy capability for remote viewing and telepathy, then the issue of trying to prove it happens never really occurs. So we seem to be genetically designed such that that level of awareness is dampened down a lot. Well, I'm going to say something now, Greg, that's sort of really out there, really weird, but a lot of your listeners may find it quite surprising. But that's one of the reasons we are one of the most advanced species in the galaxy, perhaps the most advanced species in the galaxy. And with all of these advanced spacecraft, with these advanced extraterrestrials floating about, some people could laugh and say, how could that be? That's crazy. But, civilizations out there are very old, and they've invented everything that can be invented. So inventing new things and having technology, that's not a big deal. That's already been there, done that type of thing. So eventually we'll have all the inventions that everybody else has, and, it's just not a big deal. What is interesting is that we are genetically designed to be cut off from the rest of everything that is, in the sense that we feel ourselves as isolated, alone. And that's the cutting edge of consciousness, where individual beings feel separated from each other and from other beings in the galaxy, that you're that wild aloner out there, that you're all by yourself and you're trying to connect with other people. That apparently is a very unusual experience in the galaxy, that level of separation. And so we're really on the cutting edge of research into consciousness to see how it goes, to see how it works out. Are we able to do that? Are we able to manage? And so on that level, we are arguably the most advanced species in the galaxy, because we're doing the most advanced level of research to see if we can discover ourselves, find ourselves. And so remote viewing actually fits into that. It's part of the process of discovering. We're discovering who we are, given the inhibitions that limit us to do that. It's been said that humans are sometimes called the masters of limitations. And that's not said in a derogatory way. It's said in a matter of praise. The masters of limitations. And limitations are good things, because they challenge you to reach above and beyond what you've done before. And it is my view that at some point in time in the future, people all across the galaxy will look at the human experience and say, if humans could do it, then anyone could do it. And they'll do that as a way of inspiration to others. So actually humans are very important, not just for themselves, but for everybody else in the galaxy. And so I actually believe it goes further than that. I think in the far distant future, there are people who probably seek us out just to be able to know if we really existed. Was it just a fairy tale, is it a Knights of the Round Table type of thing, or was it just a story? Did Robin Hood really exist? Or did the humans really exist? Did they really discover who they were? Did they become a species with a destiny in the galaxy, given all those limitations where they couldn't perceive across time and space very easily? They were separated from everybody that is. They still found themselves and their connection to all that is. I don't think most of humanity understands how important the human experience actually is. It's more important not just to us, it's important to everybody.
Well, there's a model of reality that states exactly what you're speaking about there, that our access to the more subtle realms is deliberately difficult for us.
Yes.
And partly because if it was easy, then we wouldn't believe this reality anymore, because we'd say, this is just a subset of a subset of a subset.
That's exactly right. It's got to be convincing in order to work.
Mm-hmm, exactly. And there, of course, there are, with remote viewing and there's other psychic techniques, people can reach beyond the bounds to the space-time reality that we find ourselves in, but it's difficult. It quite often takes time. You get some individuals, for example, who have that experience spontaneously, and that can be absolutely terrifying for them.
The good thing about remote viewing, especially using these highly structured procedures, is the replicability and the depth of target descriptions. So you get really clear. These are not vague and fuzzy stuff. You get really, really clear descriptions of what these targets are under the squeakiest of clean scientific blind conditions. And the ones that we use now are really great because they only get a non-leading email saying there's a target, remote view it. And Dick Algeier and Daz Smith are on opposite ends of the planet and no communication between them. So, and they're using slightly different methodologies. So, that's a really, if for no other reason, that's why people should watch our projects, just to see that. It's really amazing. We have one project out that's available for free. It's called the Atlantis project. And that was based on an underwater anomaly that was clearly visible in Google Earth images 1,000 miles west of Portugal and Morocco and 3 miles deep. And we have another project on the Great Pyramid of Giza, that origin, and that's actually going to be, that's sold as a DVD and as video on demand, but that's actually going to be made available for free in mid-August on YouTube. So, and there's a ton of other projects on our website that are all for free. Only some of our more recent projects that have a lot of video content that cost us a lot of money to make. In order to make polished video, did we actually charge for, and that's to pay for our costs and so on. We do reimburse the remote viewers for their expenses. They use their own cameras and things like that. So there's costs in order for us to do this type of stuff. So some of the more modern projects are for sale, but the Atlantis project is free. The Giza project, it will be free in less than a month, and there's a ton of other stuff, other projects, including an entire instructional series, way over 20 hours of instructional material, video as well as audio, printable text, all of which is free on our website.
Well, what we were talking about a moment ago regarding this, this difficulty in accessing subtle realms, this is one of the issues that you've talked about, the repeatability and the level of control there is with remote viewing. But even though there's been many, many studies of psychic phenomena over the years, one of the problems has been difficulty with repeatability, and even sometimes to get it to work. Sometimes there's a very strong result, other times it's very unclear and it's very weak. And this is one of the reasons why psychic phenomena are not taken seriously by so many people.
Yeah, but that's the nut that we cracked with remote viewing. We got it to the point where if one's sufficiently well trained, you get that replicability and you get that depth of perception. The clarity is really great. So we finally cracked that. Although I have to admit there's very few people on the planet that can do it. And again, we're going to be slowing down on our projects. So the projects that we have are a lot, but we're going to be focusing more on instructional precisely to address this issue so that other people can sort of experience it through free instructional materials rather than just, hear about these luminaries who can do what appears to be magic.
When I was looking into the Phoenix Lights thing, the phenomena, I must admit that my memory of it at the actual time was hazy, probably because there was so little reporting, but I learned that similar things reappeared in 2007, 2008, and they were written off in the same way that the original ones were. Yes, it's not the only incident. However, it's the biggest incident. The Phoenix Lights events of 1997 is the main one, but there have been other incidences where the lights reappeared and similar type of things happened. But this was a big one in 1997 because it was witnessed by so many people over such a large area. And again, a big key factor here is that the former governor of the state, went on record describing what the whole thing was about. So that was sort of a special accent for the 1997 experience. But you're totally correct. These lights have been not too infrequent. I read I actually haven't finished reading it yet. I got an interesting book by Carl Jung, the famous psychotherapist. Yeah. And his book is called Flying Saucers, A Modern Myth of Things Seen in the Sky. And perhaps unsurprisingly to anybody who knows about Jung, I don't know if you've seen this book, but he has theorized that these sort of phenomena are actually projections of our collective unconscious. Yes. Yeah. Yeah, he has a psychological explanation for a whole bunch of things. So he and Freud are very interesting in that they have sort of their own particular views of how sort of a whole collection of stuff. For example, if you look at Freud, he looks at all of psychology as physiologically based, brain-based type of stuff. So there's nowhere in Freud's understanding that you can get the remote viewing phenomenon itself or a larger consciousness. The remote viewing orientation is basically the only way that it sort of makes sense is if you understand that it's not that we have a soul, but that we are a soul and we have a body. So that the body is sort of a secondary thing, and that the soul, or what we call the subspace aspect of the larger self, projects itself through this physical body and gets it to work. And there's limitations and the perceptions and other things that it can do. But that's not Jungian or Freudian psychology. So Freud and Jung both have sort of their own spin on how they saw the world, and neither one of them can be integrated well with what we now know from the remote viewing phenomenon. For example, in the remote viewing phenomenon, it clearly indicates that we are greater than our physical body. And so the dreams may be things that we need to interpret, but they very likely are things that actually happen, not just stories that actually occur. So the interpretation of dreams is sort of a weird thing, because it's, in a sense, there's some ways to interpret dreams is to say that it's impossible to think of something that doesn't exist in some way or another. So, the idea that in sort of a modern understanding of physics is that nothing actually materializes out of the quantum realm and thus out of the macro realm unless it's recognized or conceptualized or thought of in some way. And in a very real sense, that means that when we dream something, at some level, that something actually happens. It doesn't mean that it doesn't have to be interpreted, but it does mean that the dreams happen in some way, and none of that corresponds with anything out of Freud and Jung. But yeah, I'm aware of the interpretations of that. And that Flying Saucer book of Jung's is a classic example of him taking a set of ideas of people taking a set of ideas that they have and that they've accepted, and then projecting those ideas out into sort of everything else that they see out there to make that stuff fit
within that set of ideas.
Well, I think the dream space, if we can call it that, is definitely, in my experience, it's the only thing I can really say about it, is connected with the subtle realm, maybe part of it, another aspect of it that we're talking about. Because on more than one occasion, I have, put this in air quotes now, I have met an individual or a being in a dream who expected me because they said so. They say something along, what took you so long, that type of thing. And that's just endlessly fascinating. But yeah, I agree with you. Dreams do happen in the sense that we have an experience.
Yeah, I actually record my dreams almost nightly, and I type them up and I keep them in my computer going back a great many years, and I follow them. One of the things that's interesting about the dream experience is that there's no time delay. So when an event starts to get close to our current now, you're likely to pick up evidence of that in a dream before you actually experience it in real physical life. Because with dreams, it's like remote viewing. There's no time delay. So as things get closer to us, like think of an event as like a ship. You're on the coast and there's a ship getting closer to you on the coast until it eventually pulls into the harbor. So the dream is like seeing the ship in the far distance before it actually docks at the harbor. And when it docks at the harbor, that's when the physical event actually happens. So physical events that are happening are like that boat that's distant. They're coming to you. They're getting close to you. And so with dreams, you actually get an idea of things that are headed your way. And so I record my own dreams because if something's heading my way that I don't particularly want to happen, well, that's like using a telescope to sort of see what's out there heading my way, and then I have the ability to change things so that that doesn't happen. But yeah, I find dreams to be very useful with regard to non-local or non-linear consciousness. And so I study them and I look at them and I find them to be really fascinating. But I do not dismiss them as delusional or simply psychological or neuro sort of computational fantasies.
No, I think that some of the most powerful experiences I've ever had have been, good and bad, have been in dreams, and I certainly can't deny them. If you see what I mean, the experience may fade. It may quite quickly when you wake, but if you can have an experience in a dream that's so powerful that it wakes you up and you're in shock, well then there's something to that.
Well, what I think actually happens is that the life that we live before we're physical beings actually is a sort of like a sensory overload compared to what we can experience in physical bodies. There's so much more into it. And so when we have a dream experience, we can only remember a certain amount. And that amount fades away because the computational processes of the brain sort of take over and sort of reoccupy the memory of the core's mainframe, you might call it, our brain. And so it sort of pushes that information out. And so it's only when the conscious mind is basically shut down that the dreams can get enough material in to the physical brain that it can be, that you can actually remember a little bit of it. And then you only have a short window of time to write that stuff down before the other thinking processes basically push it out. Think of the brain as like a computer, and you can load a program in, but if you load another program in that takes a lot of space, it's going to have to close down the first program and push it out in order to run properly. That's what the conscious mind is like. So there's a brief window of time after you wake that you have a chance to write down what the dream is. And after that, it will fade, and it'll fade quickly.
Well, today, Courtney, we've been talking about the latest Farsight project. It's the Phoenix Lights. As you mentioned earlier, that's part of a trilogy that you've done over recent months. As we draw things to a close for today, I know you've mentioned the website. Just throw it out there again. And that's packed with resources, and people will find out all about the remote viewing process there. We did a very long show on that, and that people will find our previous conversations linked up on this interview page.
Sure. Again, we're at www.farsight, Farsight, like seeing far.org, O-R-G, because we are a nonprofit. And we're the only venue out there where you have these full-blown scientific studies that are public, that everyone can follow and watch and so on. And they're very clearly organized on our navigation bar, plus we have a huge amount of free instructional material and a lot of other things, including some light entertainment type stuff. We also have 2 YouTube channels where we have a ton of YouTube stuff, and we also have a serious science channel. And we have a new entertainment YouTube channel that is oriented towards engaging many younger people, for example, with music videos and other stuff. So we have 2 YouTube channels, one serious science and one sort of cool and sexy entertainment stuff, in order to let word out in the largest possible realm that remote viewing is out there and it's real and so on. And 98% of everything that we have on the website is totally free, which is a huge website. So I strongly advise people to come to the website, www.farsight.org, and sign up for the free newsletter. That's the key, because again, we're a nonprofit and we do not have any method of advertising. So except for our weekly newsletter, that's the only way we have to get the information out to people of what we're doing. And so that's probably the most important thing to do.
Excellent. Well, Courtney, thank you so much for joining us once again on legalizefreedom.com.
Greg, it's been a pleasure. You're a great host, by the way. Really great with asking super questions, detailed and probing, and I really appreciate coming on your show.
Oh, thanks, Courtney. It was fun as always. Well, folks, that's it for another week. As ever, thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please check out the website. That's legalizefreedom.com, legalize-freedom.com, where you'll find an archive of programs offering alternative views on a wide range of topics, including world affairs, politics and economics, science and technology, religion and spirituality, conspiracy, and alternative history. You can also browse and buy a range of books and DVDs from our guests, and if you're feeling generous, make a donation to help keep the site up and running. Until next time, I'm Greg Moffat, and you've been listening to legalizefreedom.com.